Shalom from Jerusalem. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and this is TV7 Israel's daily update. And today we are, of course, with all of our eyes focused on the negotiations in the Sultanate of Oman. The Iranian delegation initially met with the foreign minister there, namely the head of the delegation, Abbas Araghchi, and his team. Subsequently, there was also a meeting with the American delegation headed by U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the son-in-law of President Trump, Jared Kushner. The commander of CENTCOM also joined in quite the irregular, if I may call it that, becoming part of the civilian diplomatic delegation in those talks. But nonetheless, there's much happening right now. From what I currently hear, the talks are not necessarily going as well as expected, but I'm not sure what anybody expected other than a very tough and vigorous approach from the Ayatollah regime that does not seek to succumb to the demands of the Trump administration. Meanwhile, we see also the French foreign minister visiting in Iraq, calling for regional stability, also obviously with the various complexities in Iraq and the implications of what may potentially occur in Iran the moment a U.S.-led offensive may indeed degrade the Islamic Republic to a point of no return. But before we discuss further, let's introduce first our experts for today, to include our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Next to him is Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, formerly the commander of the Israeli Air Force Air and Missile Defense. And last but certainly not least, Brigadier General in Reserve Redik Shafir, formerly a commander of the Israel Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot and a long list of other positions. It's great to see all three of you, and I'd like to immediately start with Mr. Oren. What have you heard about the negotiations thus far? Naturally, there's not much to say other than they're still semi-talking, but not necessarily directly at this point.
So, Jonathan, I've been thinking about the term proximity, and I know two uses for it. One is the proximity fuse, which our two generals know very well, regarding munitions and then explosions. And the other is proximity talks, which is what has been held in Muscat today. The talks lasted some 6 hours, and by proximity talks, what one means is that, as you said, there is one mediator who goes to the American room, hears something or gets a non-paper, as it is called in diplomacies, and then goes to the Iranian room, hears a response or a counter proposal, and goes back and forth. Now, the first session today, and the Iranians have been very quick to announce that there will be sessions. The Americans have yet to brief the media, but the first session was devoted to setting the agenda. What are we talking about? And obviously, what the American team wants to achieve is eventually an agreement which will fulfill the express wishes of the US administration and getting concessions on all three topics: the nuclear file, the ballistic missiles, and the Iranian proxies. The Iranians have another goal altogether, and that is to put off the American attack for as long as possible. They don't need an agreement. They may give the Americans something, perhaps everything, but not right now. They want to stall. They want to get some more time and perhaps have the Americans less of an appetite for a military strike.
Well, that's a point that I want to linger on for a moment with you, Mr. Oren. Why drag their feet? What's the calculus there? Since in the event that the United States does not get what it wants via diplomatic means, Naturally, as President Trump has also explicitly stated, as well as anyone in his surrounding, the alternative is the utilization of a massive force that is closing in on Iran.
Well, there are two explanations. They are not contradictory, they can complement each other. One is that the Iranians are still producing missiles and other munitions and prepared for the eventuality of a military confrontation. And the other is that they are trying via diplomacy and secret contacts to tell Saudi Arabia and others that they are going to be the target if they don't convince the Americans to hold up.
So I'd like to go to General Shafil for a moment, since the United States has quite the amassed military assets in this theater currently, speaking particularly on surface to surface capabilities, sea to surface capabilities, as well as air to surface capabilities. Uh, all of this is beyond what Israel employed during the 12-day war. And in this context, Israel may also join the United States in launching an attack. We also just saw additional squadron of F-35Bs from the United Kingdom flying into the theater, and we're seeing a lot more of those type of sophisticated 5th-gen aircraft entering into the theater, something that the Iranians have not faced ever. It will be unprecedented, the firepower introduced to such an attack. Are the Iranians delusional about some hope that they could survive this?
I think they will stretch the limits as much as they can because they have an internal problem of capitulating to the American demands. So they may offer the nuclear capability, holding off the nuclear capability, removing the uranium that they have amassed up to at this time, talking about 400 kilos, and trying to veer around and not give in on all aspects. So they may be trying to upsell the a nuclear program and save the other issues such as the ballistic missiles, the proxies, etc. I think we should also take into effect that the United States can employ a blockade on Iranian oil because they've already put pressure on Chinese banks that transfer the money for the oil that the Iranians sell the Chinese. And the next thing could be a blockade of the Hormuz area that is not allow Bandar Abbas, ships from Bandar Abbas or even Harj Island to ship off the oil before they strike. So there are other measures of putting pressure on Iran prior to hitting the red button, so to speak.
Yes, but with that being said, I mean, the Americans wouldn't need all those assets amassed in the region to employ such a blockade. They have a lot more than what is required to achieve such a deal. And the moment you do establish such a blockade with the offensive capabilities introduced by the Iranians, naturally you're granting them the initiative to spark certain conflict, something that may cause unwanted casualties or damage in such a scenario. Now, I'd like to ask, though, General Gavish, since the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps has announced that it moved from a defensive posture to an offensive posture, we see repeated exercises and drills of surface to surface capabilities, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and others being introduced by the RGC aerospace division, and obviously also, making those rhetoric type of statements where they introduce their most sophisticated ballistic missiles into their offensive array. obviously, the IDF is monitoring this very closely, understanding the challenges at hand. But what can you tell us within this variety of challenges that the Iranians are seeking to introduce? They are at the highest state of alert, obviously, for an attack.
Well, indeed, Jonathan, and the first thing is that as a military, we take them very seriously. We don't ignore their capabilities. We know that the Iranian overall are smart people. They have their own lesson learned processes, and they apply it. And we saw it, by the way, when we looked on the different interactions that we had with them. We see that they are also learning. So we take them very seriously, and we do see, as you just mentioned, that they are continuously training themselves and improving themselves, and so on. So they are military, and they are behaving as you would expect it from a military. Of course, it goes vice versa. Also, the regional forces are training, planning, coordinating their efforts, and this is happening from both sides. I think that in general, of course, we could say that if you look on the Iranian military, at the end of the day, they are quite limited. They don't really have an air force, and what they had or what they have basically could be eliminated quite easily in a way. And the real massive threat is those missiles, long-range missiles with very large amount of explosive, and we saw that they could do damages. And for this, we are all preparing ourselves. Of course, and we've talked about it more than once, there are other dimensions of this war. The Iranians are trying to be effective also in those dimensions. So bottom line is that we take them very seriously. They are preparing themselves. But if I would be a military leader from the other side, understanding what is in front of me, I'm not sure that I would be very happy.
As I was preparing also the data for tonight's TV7 Israel news bulletin, I delved into Chinese and Russian television, which were granted by the Ayatollah regime access to receive reactions from the streets of Tehran and other locations across Iran. Obviously, those individuals who reacted are vetted by the regime. But something that was quite interesting was the degree to which the average Iranians that are either supportive or subject to the propaganda that the Ayatollah regime is relaying to them, they are convinced that the United States is deterred, that they have the upper hand militarily. And Mr. Oren, there seems to be a very large gap between the average Iranian and the leadership of the regime. We heard Secretary of the Treasury in the United States during a hearing to the Senate speaking about the fact that the Iranian leadership is wiring, as he put it, like crazy, their funds, billions of dollars, out of Iran as quickly as possible, which he established quite the analogy with. Of course, the rats are starting to flee the sinking ship, so to speak. What are we to take out of that disparity between the average Iranian to the leadership, and what could that actually forespell to the moment in which the regime may indeed collapse in light of everything that is taking place?
Well, that's quite a disparity, because the average Iranian has no money and no water, even. And the Iranian elite, they know that their access to the world banking system is going to be even more limited than it has been up to now. So they are trying to smuggle their wealth abroad, of course. Whether they themselves will follow or not, whether they'll be accepted anywhere, we'll see. So they are, if they are rats with a lot of money. Now, both delegations, those headed by Arakchi and by Witkoff and Kushner, have very limited mandates. They are supposed to report back to headquarters, The Iranians know that only the supreme leader can give them any sort of freedom of maneuver. And the American delegation knows that only President Trump will have the ultimate decision making. Now, Arakchi, following today's meeting, insisted that the talks are focused only on the nuclear file. This is what Khamenei told him to say. What will happen in the second and third sessions, if there are any? Because we remember that last June, what President Trump did was say, I gave you 60 days. You came back on the 61st, too late. Now let the guns or the B-2s speak. So maybe there will be no follow-up. Let's keep watching.
Indeed. Well, the Iranian media is reporting that there may be indeed a second round of discussions, indirect that is, since while they have not reached an understanding on the framework, there is a very small type of mutual aspiration to persist in trying to find such a framework. So we'll have indeed to wait and see. But nonetheless, General Shafir, I'd like to hear your take on, once again, we see that Russia, on the one hand, is exclusively discussing, in contrast to the June conflict when it provided some systems prior to the launch or the spark of Operation Rising Lion on the 13th of June and subsequently Operation Midnight Hammer. There were some electronic warfare systems and radars that the Russians sought to provide the Iranians. In this instance, we're not seeing that type of support. We did see a couple of cargo aircraft arrive in Iran from China, no less. But the comparison here is 5 to 8 cargo aircraft from China versus more than 120, 130 cargo aircraft from the United States into theater. I mean, again, the power disparity is significant. But in your take, the complexities that may occur out of this environment, what should we take note of?
Well, let's go back about half a year ago when the strikes on Iran towards the end of the war. Most of their forces were on the run, fleeing if they can and hiding wherever they can, and they were rendered inoperable within quite a short time. That is about 10 days. So things wouldn't change at this time. I will take one point that we discussed before. There is a consideration, I think, by the Americans that maybe they would like the Iranians to strike first. Reason being that the situation in Taiwan between the Chinese and the Taiwanese, where the Chinese are putting pressure on Taiwan, is such that if the Americans strike, they may be giving the Chinese an opportunity to say that they will try likewise with Taiwan. So there is a possibility that they will put pressure on Iran without shooting in order to strangle it into submission. But having said that, obviously everybody is expecting a strike on Iran, no matter what they do, because the disparity is much greater than it was between Israel and Iran in June 25. And so I would expect that the Americans will do the same thing they did with Iraq, which is shock and awe. I wouldn't be surprised if they target the IRGC and not other elements, because the IRGC are the ones that are preventing the masses from going out to the streets. So that may be a way to not only strike Iran, but at the weakest point, and at the point where they put pressure on the masses who went out to the streets.
The
So we'll
RGC,
have
but
to wait to
I
see.
thought, General, that the besieged forces were also very much involved in the activities on the ground domestically.
Yes, what I meant was that they wouldn't strike.
The army.
I would say yes, and they wouldn't
Mhm.
strike. Let's say um, the Iranian establishment institutions and such in order to show a force that will make the masses go out to the streets again. So there are many ways. There are 1,000 ways to skin a cat, but there are many ways to actually put pressure on our regime if you want it to fall, other than strike its administrative areas, etc., that would actually have the masses or some of the masses support the regime. And the idea is not to destroy Iran, but to have them them into submission.
Indeed. Well, naturally, as General Gavish mentioned earlier, the first and foremost, war is a battle of wits, and the Iranians are smart. They're shrewd. They're evil in that sense. But here specifically, talking, of course, about the Ayatollah regime, which is not necessarily wise in its undertaking, or it wasn't in this position. As we speak today, the Chinese are a little bit more shrewd than they are, if I may put it that way, and they know that they're not self-sustainable, and therefore I doubt that they would attack Taiwan in such a fashion, but rather employ sovereignty and commit to certain activities that would
Yeah,
then try and take over the country. Obviously, the United States and European allies are committed to respond to any such event, and we do not want to see such a scenario trigger what may turn into an actual world war. But General Gavish, we have many partners and allies of the United States in the region. Mr. Owen alluded to the fact that the Iranians may be buying time in order to try and apply pressure on those allies and partners, to include Saudi Arabia, to include Qatar, to include the United Arab Emirates, to include Bahrain, countries that have committed trillions of dollars to try and help the United States gain the advantage within the context of strategic power competition on the front of artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and other aspects. How can the United States defend those countries as the top expert in this field? Is there a certain mechanism in place to really ensure their protection? Obviously, we do see a lot of assets again going into those countries from the United States, from European allies, and others to try and secure them from what may be about to come.
Well, indeed, Jonathan, and you're right, there is a lot of potential also in this area. But I think that we have to remember first that the Iranians, when they are saying that they would attack, they mainly mean US assets in those countries. I'm not sure that the Iranians would be smart to attack the countries directly and their own assets. This is the first thing. The second thing is that from the US point of view, of course, there is a lot of emphasis on air defense assets and ballistic missile defense assets that are literally pouring into the region. And we have to remember that also along the year, those countries, they bought from the United States quite a significant amount of capabilities when it comes to air and missile defense. So there is also a very close relation between the United States and those countries, those militaries within those countries. They train themselves for quite a long time. They know how to work together. We have to say it. CENTCOM is very, I would say, capable on working with the allies, and he did it from very long time. And we also have to remember that we are, I would say, experienced in a way, because those relations between militaries, training, working together, we saw them also during the last conflicts. Although not all of the other countries were directly attacked, but you have to understand that they have to prepare themselves also during this time, and this really put a lot of oil into the systems of how do we work together, how do we protect ourselves, and so on. We all remember, we say it again and again, there is nothing hermetic. If the Iranian will decide to strike those countries, they can do it. For them, it's in a way even much easier because the distance is not as long as it is from Israel, and they could use other capabilities. So if Iran will decide to take it to a full regional fight, this is something that could happen. But I think that the one that would lose out of it more than anyone else would be really Iran, because its capability today to deal with the United States, Israel, is, as I mentioned before, quite limited. And now, if you would add to it some other capabilities which are there in the region, I think that it would even bring them to a even harder situation. So they would really have to think twice before what they're doing. Of course, there is a lot of rhetoric. They're saying all kind of things, but before going to the action itself, I think that at the end of the day, it won't work on the benefit of Iran if they would do something like this.
Indeed. Well, with that, I'd like to thank General Shafil, General Gavish, and Mr. Oren for all of your valuable insights, and to thank you at home as well. We will broadcast tonight, of course, TV7 Israel News, our daily news bulletin, as well as a special edition of Editor's Note, where I'll be joined by Mr. Marshall Billingsley to further dissect the complexities related to the Iranian portfolio at such a tense time as this. But until then, from here in Jerusalem, wishing you already a Shabbat Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.